Hello everybody, how are you going? And welcome to this video where today I will be looking at why high-speed rail might not be right for Canada, something that has been talked about previously and even hits close to home as Australia is always tossing up between putting it in, it's too expensive, not putting it in, and from a Canada and Australian perspective, they're both very large countries that would probably highly benefit, but it's just so hard to justify without the populations.
Ottawa is expected to announce plans for a high-speed rail line linking Toronto and Montreal. The project has been promised before but never delivered, and some experts think the price tag might get in the way again. CBC's Rowan Kennedy explains.
Just straight off the start there, it's just exactly what is issued and uttered.
The federal government is expected to move forward with plans to build a high-speed rail network that connects Quebec City and Toronto. So we asked experts whether they think this time it will finally work. Canada is the only G7 country without an intercity high-speed or high-frequency rail system in the works. Ottawa has been studying several proposals. Sources tell Radio-Canada the Fed now has picked a winning bidder. Tracks would stretch from Quebec City to Toronto and include stops in Trois-Rivières, Laval, Montreal, Ottawa, and Peterborough. Every single day, about 50 domestic flights make the trip between Montreal and Toronto, and experts say that's unsustainable.
Yeah, and even the fact that I'll have to go to Google Maps to see exactly how far that is, as they haven't mentioned it yet, and I just want to try to get the proper exact sense of scale about how far something like that would be. But to be a domestic flight, like, that's the thing, planes are so fast, by the time you're getting any kind of altitude, you're just landing again. So it feels like you taxi for half an hour or 45 minutes, you got to put your bags in. God help you if you were just going to be having to put checked luggage in as well. I mean, this kind of trip doesn't really lend itself to most people putting checked luggage in, but still, just to be having to board and wait, and then, oh, sorry, this plane, you just have to disembark and get on another plane because we have problems, which is good from a safety perspective, but my goodness, does it make the day so much longer. The half-an-hour flight takes 5 hours to do. Where trains, they just enable people just to go constantly, just get on, get off. You can stop all the way along the way, and it still barely is any longer, or it is going to be shorter if you include all the taxiing and everything, than flying. And it's cheaper, usually. And there we go, that's exactly what I wanted to be seeing. An 8-hour drive, 809 kilometers, or an hour 40 flight from $577. Either way, you can see how if you could just get a high-speed rail that might take 2 hours or even 3 hours, if you got an extra hour and a half of plane ability and even getting to the airport compared to just going to a train station like a central station, whatever it may be, for 800K, it just makes so much sense.
We have to take vehicles off the road, we have to take vehicles out of the air, and we have to move people and freight on more sustainable means of transportation.
Do you think it's going to happen?
No, too big, too expensive. We don't have the political will to.
Wow.
Experts estimate the cost of building the network will range from $80 to $128 billion. Trains are expected to be mostly electric and able to reach speeds up to 300 kilometers per hour.
Nice. Travel times. Oh, here we go. Oh, obviously they're going to be having multiple stops and you have to be speeding up and slowing down, but the travel time is going to be the key. If you can actually get it to 300k an hour, I mean, that's the incredible thing. Well, let's say someone like China's new high-speed rail network, where it's so vast, I believe they have, by an order of magnitude, it feels like so many more rail lines than anywhere else in the world, and their trains are the fastest, if not some of the fastest, but definitely way up there at like 500. They keep kind of testing those kind of speeds. But now, what could you do if you could have those kind of speeds? But let alone 300 should be fine.
How long your commutes could take Toronto to Montreal in 3 hours instead of 6 hours by car, or 5 hours by via rail.
Hang on. Google Maps said 8 hours, and then they're saying 6? That's a little bit of speeding, or I don't know what's going on there. Either way, 3 hours, 6 hours, 5 hours. I mean, so that's the thing. I was bang on with my 3-hour guess, and to be beating an airline, by the time you get to the airport, check in, go through security, get on the flight, get boarded, get waited around, and then just actually get in the air, it is going to be a 3-hour trip.
All in 3 hours instead of 6 hours by car, or 5 hours by via rail. Montreal to Quebec City in an hour instead of 3, and going from Montreal to Ottawa could take less than an hour by high-speed train.
See, I actually think that these kind of routes are the really crux of the entire operation, is to be taking a 2-hour train compared to a 50-minute train. It just feels like so much less of a commitment. If you can just trick yourself to having like 99 cents compared to $2 kind of idea, it's a completely different ball game, let alone an hour and a half in the car, just sitting in traffic, maybe all those kind of things. Yes, a train can be delayed, but I feel like trains are pretty darn good at being on time. There's not many other factors that come in their way compared to cars, let alone planes. I mean, you can't be having a plane for a 1.5 hour car ride. You'll be up in the air for 7 minutes, and it's probably going to cost you $200, so no one's going to be doing it, so it's not even going to be offered realistically. But to be cutting it down to a high-speed rail network, an interconnected high-speed rail network, just makes so much sense. And if you can just make it incentivized for people, all of a sudden you just have people going everywhere in a really efficient manner. Like you said, it needs to be cheaper and faster to get people out of the air and off the roads. And you can see why ships are the most effective form of transport for goods, and then trains are number 2. You can't really ship across just land, so go for the train.
So why is Via Rail so slow? Well, one reason is it has to share the tracks with freight cars, which have the right of way.
If you provide very high-speed service with frequent trains and affordable prices, you can get a lot of people to take the train. We're talking quadrupling of the number of current riders on Via. I think it depends on whether the federal government in Canada, combined with the provinces of Ontario and Quebec, can agree on a stable source of funding that ensures the completion of the project.
Research suggests high-speed rail lines can help ease the cost of housing and get cars off the road by making it easier for people to live farther away from major cities. Quebec mayors are optimistic about it boosting tourism and business, but experts say if it happens, it's likely still at least a decade away.
I mean, of course, these kind of things take time, but the best time to start was 10 years ago, and the next best time to start is today. And that's the kind of mindset that you have to be living by. You can't be going, well, considering we haven't done it yet, that just means the best course of action is to never do it. Like, yes, things are more expensive now, but then people are making more money now. Whatever it may be, it's just a silly excuse to say that, oh, well, it's going to take too long, let's not even bother. Especially when you are operating a government, you should be thinking about 10 years, 20 years out. You shouldn't have to be dealing with day-to-day nuances of, should we do this, should we do that? It's like, no, if you are able to project out like massive corporations do, where they're not worrying about this quarter, they're projecting 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. If governments were able to operate more like that and actually just stick to their guns, which is so hard when you have a constantly changing leadership, so to say, but realistically, the problems with any country is not really going to change over that short of a time frame. Like, it's such a slow moving beast. Like, they're talking about housing crisis and cost of living crisis and all those kind of things. That's not just a 1 year thing. It's not just a wave. It's an ongoing process. And for 4 years, 10 years, it might go and take forever. It's just like, oh, the construction's still going. And then all of a sudden it's done. 10 years goes by so fast for so many people as well. So realistically, to be able to get this kind of infrastructure moving so you can address this just sprawling ability where no one really can live out because there's nothing out there. But then with high-speed rail, you can still have a job in the city and it's only a half an hour commute. It's like having a fairly reasonable drive compared to just living out in the sticks.
Well, for more on the future prospects of Canadian high-speed rail, we have reached Matti Semiatiki in Toronto. He's the director of the Infrastructure Institute at the University of Toronto. Matti, thanks for being here tonight.
For sure. It's nice to be with you.
High-speed rail. It has been a dream that has been discussed since the 90s. Will this dream finally turn into a reality?
It's so brutal when you hear that. Since the 90s. So it could have been done 20, 25 years ago. And yes, the technology wouldn't be up to scratch to what it is now, but it's going to be less investment, surely, to just have to change anything over to more modern technology than to just have to rebuild the entire thing. You know, you've still got the rail lines, for goodness sake, and it might just be a bit of alteration if you want to be increasing the speed. Either way, though, Japan's had high-speed rail for a long time in terms of, it's not like, oh, well, 25 years ago they were going at 16k an hour. No, it's fast still. Just because it's not 500k an hour like some of China's trains, it'll be fine. And you could have had it 20, 30 years ago.
This certainly has been on the books and something that's been talked about and dreamt about for decades. This is the closest it's come. We're now in the midst of a procurement, and we have cabinet saying they are seriously considering high-speed rail and ready to give it the go-ahead. So this is the furthest it's come. The question now is, what does the plan actually look like? How much will it cost? And is this really something that Canadians want at this moment, given all the challenges we're facing in our country?
And what is your sense of that, if this is something that Canadians want? Because Canada right now is the only G7 nation without high-speed rail.
So weird.
That's absolutely true. We are the only country, G7 country, without high-speed rail, but we also have many other struggles in this country. We have a doctor shortage, we have an affordable housing crisis, we have Indigenous communities without safe drinking water and housing, and we have local public transit systems that are really struggling with their operating and capital costs. So I think ultimately the question is this the moment to spend a huge amount of money? The estimates are looking like it's between 80 and 100 and 120 billion dollars for this project. Is this really where we want to sink all of this treasure, all of this muscle to build out this project, or should the resources be spent better somewhere else?
And
of course, it's a fair criticism of the entire thing, but I would argue that you're not spending 120 billion just up front. You're spending it over the next 10, and with construction timelines, probably 15, 20 years, and just ongoing after that, of course. But that's then comes down to, if you say 10 years, then it's only 12 or 8 billion a year. So the entire numbers then change, and yes, it's still a lot of money, it's still billions, but you're operating at a governmental scale. You're operating at is it a federal? I can only presume it's a federal level would be funding this, not a provincial level. But maybe. I'm not entirely sure of how the entire Canadian Treasury and everything would work in that regard. Still though, yes, there are always going to be other roadblocks like local infrastructure or cultural sensitivities or cost of living crises, even domestically or just locally in certain cities, whatever it may be. There are always going to be things that you go, oh, well, what if we spend it here? But this kind of thing is actually able to and is trying to address multiple aspects of the same problem, whether it be cost of living crisis and housing crisis, being, like we said, able to move out further but still feeling close to home as a job prospects in a city. It's also trying to then enable planes to get out of the sky. It's also trying to then bring it down the cost of living. If you do need to suddenly go to see a family member, it doesn't cost you $600 and it doesn't cost you 18 hours of your life just driving across the entire country. It costs you a few hours and a couple of bucks in comparison just to be able to get there in a really efficient and just nice, calm method. You know, trains like this are so quiet as well. That's the thing that I feel like is often overlooked. You have planes, like a plane is such a noisy, aggressive environment. The wind noise is so massive. You can see why people are wearing noise cancelling headphones, but these trains, being at their so kind of aerodynamic and so long, I'm sure at the front it would be a different story, but still just in the cabins it's so quiet in comparison. It's amazing. And so to be having all of those things just stacking up, and it's not 120 billion, it's really only 12 billion at most for now. It just feels like a weird thing the way you wouldn't do it. Like I said, the best time to start was 30 years ago and the best next time is today.
And what's your sense of kind of the PR battle? Because this is a long-term project, and selling that idea to Canadians when they're not going to see it in a couple of months or in even a few years.
But exactly, it's so short-minded.
These big infrastructure projects are being built for decades and centuries, not for years. So this is long-term. Yeah. But again, we're struggling with all these other issues in the country. Today's announcement was really an announcement to get to the starting line. We're not even at the starting line yet. They haven't picked a contractor yet. They still have to design the project. They have to release all the details about the budget and how fast it's actually going to go and the travel time. So there's a long way to go. This was an announcement. And we also have to hear from the opposition, who's leading in the polls right now. What's their take on this project? Is this something that would die if there's a change of, if and when there's a change of government?
You know, we hear a lot about private-public partnerships. Do you see this project as being kept wholly public, or do you think that the private sector will step in some capacity?
Yeah. I feel like you just want to be keeping this a private thing. If as a governmental level you can just hold all the keys, it just makes so much more sense for a long-term point of view, because you can almost just charge. I mean, it's a lot of money, but you could charge, and then eventually you would make your money back to the point where you could reduce ticket sales and reduce ticket pricing over and over and over again, or at least maintain them. So then you're only really keeping the upkeep instead of just trying to pay off the 120 billion. Also, what kind of private investment is going to be able to afford 120 billion dollars? That is pretty unlikely, unless someone like BlackRock is coming in and going, yeah, we'll build rail. I just don't see that happening unless you're selling governmental bonds, or I don't know how that would even work. And in relation to him talking about the opposition maybe coming in and then just cancelling the entire thing because it's an unknown quantity at this point of view, I feel like if you were able to streamline the entire process, or, you know, the oppositions do get things ready to come forward and try to win an election. So it's not like nothing happens in the 4 years that the opposition aren't in power. And so if you are able to use that time to get all your ducks in a row, and then you can maybe win on that promise, but also just have it ready to go then just immediately put it into action. And 4 years of down the line pipeline, you're not going to be able to stop that anymore because you've already spent so much money. It would be a death sentence to try and cancel it. Like, everyone's already going, well, we've waited this long. We've waited maybe a third of the time that we need to kind of get this thing up and running, and then you're going to cancel it? It would never happen. So if you can just start it, then it's not going to stop.
The track that it's on now, it's being called an alliance model. Okay. This will include the private sector. The private sector is going to work with the government to design it, and then it looks like they will ultimately operate it. We've had problems with public-private partnerships in Canada of late. The Eglinton Crosstown line is woefully delayed and not open yet. We have the Ottawa LRT, so there are some setbacks. We're going to see if this one is done any better, if it's not a partnership but an alliance. We'll have to see if that delivers better results.
Do you think that that would alleviate some?
What's the difference there? Partnership versus an alliance. That's a very thesaurus kind of, no, nuance, legal term. We're going, well, no, it's not this, it's that. That just seems like a ridiculous distinction. One thing, though, I do want to know, I would love it if someone was able to explain how they work in cold weather and from a snow clearing point of view. Do you just have to, I don't know, do you have to send a snowplow through, or do you have to heat the rail lines? I just saw this kind of big old diesel train, and I feel like I haven't seen that kind of train in a long time. So much, well, all of Sydney's rail network just looks like the VIA trains, was it, from the start? That's just like international cross-country trains. That's not really a thing. That looks like it should be pulling shipping containers or iron ore. That's the only time you ever see something like that in Australia. And so how does that work? Like, do you need a diesel locomotive to be going through first? Or I don't know. I don't know how it would work in a really cold weather situation. And I guess it operates somewhere. Like, Japan does get snow, and China does get snow, but I don't know how it actually works, because you don't want to be slip sliding away at 350k an hour.
Do you think that that would alleviate some concerns if there is some private sector involvement here, that the cost is not going to, and the budget won't balloon out of control as we have seen in some other projects?
Transportation projects across the country are ballooning. We're building transit projects where the cost per kilometer is between $500 million and $750 million, and in some cases upwards of $1 billion per kilometer.
Wait, what? Why? I feel like give me that contract. I'll single-handedly build it if you're giving me $1 billion per kilometer. I'll go out and buy whatever I need. I'll get it up and running. $1 billion a kilometer for transport networks. Why and what is that for? That's crazy. I mean, it does make me wonder now how much their proposal for the Sydney to Melbourne and Sydney to Brisbane kind of East Coast high-speed rail line would be. I know it's not a small figure, but I don't believe it's anywhere that much. That's ridiculous. And that's not even talking about this. I mean, I guess if it's 120 billion, but it was 800k, then it would be way cheaper than $1 billion a kilometer. But still, how is it $1 billion a kilometer? How is it even more than like 10 million a kilometer? Even $1 million? Like, what? How is that possible? Someone's just raking it in. And so I don't know if that's the public sector or the private sector just making a mockery of it. But I don't know. I feel like if you could, governments just don't work that way. But if you could have an efficiently run governmental system instead of private sticking their fingers in it, I don't know. It just feels like something's going a little bit awry there.
Transportation projects across the country are ballooning. We're building transit projects where the cost per kilometer is between $500 million and $750 million, and in some cases upwards of $1 billion per kilometer. It is to be expected that the costs are going to be high and will likely balloon. Many of those projects themselves were delivered through public-private partnerships. So the delivery model is not a savior in and of itself. It's going to require detailed coordination, attention to detail, and making sure that the public sector and the private sector have the expertise and the capacity to deliver this project effectively.
Do you think that we have enough people, enough population density to make a project like this worthwhile?
There we go.
I think we do, but I think ultimately the question is about trade-offs. I mean, Via Rail right now in this corridor is carrying around 4 million people. It could go up 4 million per year. To put that in perspective, the TTC carries about 2.5 million people per day, and the Montreal Metro carries 1 million per day. So there are other areas where we're carrying huge numbers of people. And the question again is whether this amount of cost, 80 billion to 120 billion, is really the best place to be making those investments when there's so many other projects and so many other areas, and even the transportation world alone, let alone across our entire economy and communities, where we could be making other investments.
I mean, it is a good point, and I mentioned it originally in terms of having the population density density to really try and get the numbers to where you can go, yes, it is just every 10 minutes we have a high-speed rail line just feeding and constantly just building up the capacity of these train lines to where it's actually being used efficiently, because that would be the worst thing, to spend all the money and have no one use it. I guess that's just a ticketing price thing, because people are going to be using it if it's cheap enough, and it makes sense in that regard, but still, it's difficult, and I can see why people would be worried that it's like, well, we could really just use even just a tenth of that money. Just give us $10 billion into the Montreal network or into the Toronto network or anything like that, and we can go from 3 million up to 5 million and just really get people traveling around. Just maybe extend the existing rail lines a little bit more, just out into the sticks to get more people into the city. And it might not be a 300-kilometer-hour train, but it might be an 80-kilometer-an-hour train, and that's still pretty fast. Like, that's way faster than most cars will go if you're sitting in traffic. And so, look, it's always a decent point to the argument, but you can just see how effective high-speed rail can be. And yes, to go all the way across, to go from east to west coast, that would be a big ask, especially with the kind of geology and geography of Canada. But just to be limiting it to more the really highly densely populated cities, just bang, 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 over on the more east coast side, it makes sense. Like, no one in Australia is asking from a Perth to Sydney rail, but you are asking for Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, and that makes sense. It's really the same argument.
You know, with all of these additional pressures and pulls, how do you see this conversation playing out in the next few years about making high-speed rail a reality in Canada?
Oh.
This is going to need a constituency behind it. Projects of this scale don't just happen because the government forces it from the top down. It's going to need a groundswell of support, and we still haven't seen exactly who that constituency is. Are there people in the country clamoring for this? Does this become an election issue that people run on and say, I will get this project done because this is what Canadians want and need? Or are Canadians ultimately looking for other things and the politicians are going to look elsewhere? In Canada, you have both a top-down approach where governments propose projects, but also they require bottom-up support if they're really going to go forward. And it remains to be seen who the constituency is and how hard they push to make this project a reality.
I mean, look, of course it makes sense to be having both a top-down model and a bottom-up model, but really I feel like you can almost force, in a good way, a bottom-up model by starting with the top-down model. You go, this is what we're doing, this is what we're committing to, and people go, yeah, I can actually see the positive elements in that. And so, yeah, I actually do support that. And then all of a sudden you do have the bottom up, and then it allows you to really just run with it and snowball it and just change things if you really need to. But realistically, it started with the top, but you kind of tricked, in a good way, the people into giving you support that they otherwise would have been sitting on the fence just going, I don't know. But you go, oh, cool, they're actually doing something for once. Yeah, I'll get up and support that, whatever it may be. It can be highly, highly effective just to go for it. Just do it. Because if you've been talking about it for 30 years, it's already on everyone's minds. People know what it is. It's like, oh, yeah, one day we might get that. You know, it's only been 3 generations by that time. But no. We know what it is. Everyone can just go either and support it. They know what it is from the 90s that they can support it, or they not support it. It's not new. And so just go ahead and do it. If you've been thinking about it for so long, you might as well go and do it, as there is always going to be other things that are apparently better off spending the money on. Whatever it may be, there's always going to be roadblocks. But if it's been on people's mind and proposed, it just feels like it would be ridiculous to leave it forever. And so when are you going to do it? Never? Probably not. And so if it's not never, then it's now.